Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking an urgent, deeply grounded, and investigative look into one of the absolute biggest challenges to human survival, the systemic machinery of global warfare. We're going to deconstruct war, not as a series of random, chaotic events, but as a highly engineered, interlocking machine. We'll be exploring the structural engine that drives it, the physical resources that fuel it, and the psychological levers that allow the whole thing to operate.
To really understand this machine, we first have to picture where it starts, right? It begins in these incredibly sterile, high-stakes environments. Picture a gleaming brass shell casing hitting a marble floor in slow motion. Behind closed doors, in dimly lit, opulent boardrooms, massive geopolitical decisions are engineered. There's this stark, almost chilling contrast between the simple stroke of a pen on an archival peace treaty and the modern high-tech robotic assembly lines churning out weapons as a direct result. War, at its core, begins as a calculated transaction in rooms exactly like this.
But as you know, the physical consequences of those boardroom decisions look entirely different. Thousands of miles away, those abstract calculations of global power translate into kinetic, devastating physical destruction. We're talking desolate landscapes, deeply scarred by trenches and craters, aerial drones circling overhead. This is the stark reality on the ground. A remote, entirely devastated battlefield.
And if we zoom all the way in, past the trenches, past the drones overhead, we find the micro-level operator trapped right inside this massive system. Think of a single soldier, their eye reflecting the flickering data of a heads-up display. This establishes our core thesis for today: war is a constructed machine. It completely relies on macro-level economics, mid-level resource scarcity, and the micro-level psychology of the individual just to keep its gears turning.
Act 1. The engine. Anarchy and economics.
Okay, let's dive into this. What is actually driving the structural momentum of global conflict? Well, it all begins with a fascinating concept known as the security dilemma. You see, because the global system is fundamentally anarchic, meaning there isn't some central overarching world police force to guarantee everyone's safety, states exist in a constant condition of self-help. When one nation builds up its military just to protect itself, its neighbors look at that and interpret the buildup as a potential threat. So what do? They respond by arming themselves, which triggers a spiral. The real tragedy here is that the anarchic nature of international relations forces even peace-seeking states into this inevitable defensive arms race.
And guys, the sheer scale of that arms race is absolutely staggering. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, global military expenditure reached $1.7 trillion in 2017. That was the highest level since the end of the Cold War. Just pause for a second, let the economic weight of that number sink in. That is $1.7 trillion in opportunity costs. Money completely diverted from global health, from education, from the very infrastructure and communities that surround us, all just to feed this engine of mutual deterrence.
But here's the thing. For some, this isn't a dilemma at all. It's a highly profitable business model. The sources dive into what is often called the military-industrial complex. And just look at these numbers. After the events of 9/11, defense contractor Lockheed Martin saw its stock price surge by almost 900% over the following 2 decades. More recently, during the onset of the Ukraine conflict, while broader global markets stumbled, Lockheed's stock shot up by 42%, and General Dynamics went up by 22%. Speaking purely impartially here, the data shows that the business of war operates almost like a wildly successful startup, where extended, prolonged conflicts heavily reward the defense industry.
Act 2. The fuel, resources, and climate triggers.
Now, what's really interesting here is that while the engine might be built on structural anarchy and economics, it runs on the fierce competition for the Earth's finite resources. High-value natural resources play this dual role. They are both the primary object of geopolitical competition and the financial lifeblood of violence. Take the Democratic Republic of Congo. Gold smuggling there provides roughly $400 million annually to armed rebel groups. Meanwhile, essential survival resources, like water, are creating existential border tensions right now in the Nile and Indus River basins. And looking to the future, the lithium triangle in South America perfectly highlights how the green energy transition is sparking intense strategic competition over lithium and cobalt.
Add climate change to this mix and you get a massive threat multiplier. Rising temperatures and extreme weather don't usually cause war directly. Rather, they act through indirect pathways. It's like a domino effect. Climate shocks ruin agricultural yields, which devastates local economies. This economic hardship then forces mass migration, which in turn strains resources in receiving areas, heightens social tensions, and exacerbates existing societal fractures. Ultimately, it paves the way straight to political unrest and conflict.
Act 3. The Operator. The Psychology of Violence.
So we've seen the engine and the fuel, but how do ordinary people who generally have an inherent moral resistance to harming others, become active participants in this machine? The absolutely crucial point here is that the human mind actually has to be engineered to blank out empathy. Psychologist Albert Bandura outlined this terrifyingly logical process he called moral disengagement. First up, there's moral justification, recasting the violence as serving a noble, higher cause. Second, euphemistic labeling, using sanitized terms like collateral damage instead of killing civilians. Third, displacement of responsibility. That's the classic "I was just following orders" defense. And finally, dehumanization, stripping the enemy of their human qualities entirely. When placed in an atrocity-producing situation, these cognitive tricks essentially soothe the conscience. This psychological desensitization is perfectly, chillingly captured in a quote often attributed to Joseph Stalin. "One man's death is a tragedy, a million deaths are a statistic." That pause right there, that's necessary. The psychological concept of diminishing sensitivity means that as casualty rates climb, human populations become increasingly numb to the horror. The sheer scale of global conflict actually helps normalize it.
Act 4. The Override. Systemic Disarmament.
Let's move on and see how this builds a case for our future. Are we just permanently trapped in this cycle? Well, there's a major debate in the scientific community about this. The evolutionary view suggests that humans are biologically wired for war, driven by deep-seated in-group favoritism and out-group hostility. But contrast that with the anthropological view, championed by experts like R. Brian Ferguson. They argue that the idea of war being just human nature is an empirically unsupportable myth. In this constructivist view, war is a cultural invention. And because humanity constructed this machine, we hold the absolute power to unlearn it, dismantle it, and construct a totally different reality.
But dismantling it requires real institutional overrides. Frameworks are currently being proposed to transition the world from collective security, which relies heavily on military alliances and the threat of force, to common security, which assumes peace is achieved by addressing everyone's underlying needs. One major proposal out there is the United Nations Emergency Peace Service, or UNEPS. Think of this as a standing, rapid response force of 13,500 dedicated individuals, not just military but civilian and police, designed to prevent armed conflict and address environmental and human security crises long before the war machine can spool up. Ultimately, the mechanics of global conflict rely on our collective willingness to just look away. Consider this final quote from Edwin Turpel, a weapons merchant. He said, "If I really thought about the consequences all the time, I certainly wouldn't have been in this business. You have to blank it off." This explainer was built to do the exact opposite. Can society as a whole stop blanking off the consequences of its own global mechanics? That, my friends, is the $1.7 trillion question. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep questioning the machinery around you.